Hello, World History students. Welcome to your first review session for Units 1 and 2 from the time periods roughly 1200 to 1450. As you're watching this video, what I want you guys to be doing is have those unit review sheets out that you hopefully can find on Schoology. And as you're going through this, I want you to be filling out that sheet as much as you can. If you can't print out that sheet, I suggest you do it on a separate sheet of paper and just have these key terms highlighted and underlined. I noticed a lot of problems, a very common problem that a lot of people have on your DBQ essays is that you have trouble with contextualization and you have trouble with outside evidence. And I think one of the reasons why you have trouble with that is because you have a hard time identifying specific information that would work for you. So I have taken the liberty with the sheet of highlighting with these key terms some of that specific information that I hope you use. And our first video of today will be on the religions. So let's go ahead and get started. So the first religion we're talking about is Hinduism. Now, Hinduism got its start in present-day India. We don't know exactly who the author was, who the founder was for this thing. However, I guess you could give credit to the Aryans of civilization who came from modern-day Iran. Some of the beliefs they believe in Hinduism is they believe in one God who has many different forms. So I think on World History 2 we call them polytheistic, but that's really not correct. Other things that they believe is in karma, which is, again, the idea that if you do bad things now, in the future, bad things can happen to you, and vice versa with good. They also believe in reincarnation, the idea that your actions in this life can affect how you get reincarnated in the next life. I just want to point out some of the things in the AP exam, but they love to hear about it. One is the caste system, which we'll talk about in the next slide. And of course, the other part of it is that Hinduism is primarily located in India and plays a huge role in how India organizes its society. All right, so next up is the caste system, and this is how Indians, even today, how they influence their society. So first off, as I mentioned, this the reincarnation idea. So if you start off at the bottom, the quote-unquote untouchables, supposedly if you do your dharma, i.e. your duty, you can move up the pyramid until you get up to Brahmins, Now you might ask yourself, what happens if you're an untouchable and you don't like being that? Can you just move up the class system? And the answer for Hindus is no. Once you're in a certain class system, you're stuck in that class system until your next life. So the next religion we're going to talk about is Buddhism. Now, Buddhism also gets its start in India, and it's very much a reaction to Hinduism. It has a lot of basis in there. For one, it also believes in reincarnation. However, one of the big ways it rejects Hinduism is the caste system. They don't. The Buddha actually said there shouldn't be any caste system, and anyone can reach enlightenment, at least in theory. And one of the things that he adds on a twist for that reincarnation is the idea that life is pain. Part of his Four Noble Truths, the first one on there, is life is pain, and that he wants to reach enlightenment to end all suffering. And the question is, how do you reach enlightenment to end all suffering? And that is you follow the Eightfold Path, which is basically 8 different steps or 8 different things people should do in order to reach enlightenment. And again, this starts in India and eventually through trade routes like the Indian Ocean trade route and the Silk Roads, spreads to Southeast Asia and China as well. So again, I highlighted the things I mostly care about for the AP exam. It eliminates that caste system as compared to the Hinduism, and it's spread on those trade routes. The next religion we'll talk about is Confucianism. Now, hopefully you guys all know Confucianism started in China. And the big thing you needed about China, there's a lot of other different religions at play during this time period. I'm just focusing on Confucianism. Was that this was a time of a lot of warfare and societal uncertainty when Confucius was first journeying around. And what he was trying to do was try to figure out how to organize society to make a balance where everyone lives in peace. And that is really what I want you guys to think about when you guys think about Confucianism. It's all about balances in the world. Whenever there's one thing, there has to be an opposite. And everyone's job, though, is to try to find that balance and to play your role in that balance. I put this picture right here, the 5 relationships of Confucianism. And essentially the idea is if you get put into a role according to Confucianism, you have to do that role. And you have to respect your elders. and just obey whatever role you're assigned to do. And eventually that role might change in your life, but if you violate that role, that could result in the end of society. Next up, this is also related in China, the civil service system, and it's kind of related to Confucianism, mainly because this is related to the bureaucracy that the government does. And one of the ways that decides that you get to be in the bureaucracy in the government, which generally is a well-paying job, is that you have to study Confucianism and understand the ideals of Confucianism in order to pass the exam and then get that job that you want in that centralized bureaucracy. Now, later on, I think we talked about in this class that the civil service system in this test eventually gets corrupted because higher up elites start using it as a way to basically separate them from peasants, and then maybe even buying in some people who don't necessarily deserve to get in, and creating jobs in the bureaucracy that are not necessarily needed. But at least at the beginning, this is a great way to have conformity and create a complex government system. Next up, a big key term that I want you guys to know is filial piety, which again, this is connected to Confucianism because it's the idea that you should honor and respect your elders, particularly the men, I think they put on there. So one of the things, the reason why government especially likes this, you can think about, is what if the governor is considered as the age-respected elder, even if you don't necessarily agree with what the emperor is doing, you should probably still follow his lead. And the last big term that we're going to talk about with Confucianism in China is the mandate of heaven. So on this picture right here, you have the dynastic cycle, which is part of it. But essentially, each emperor, each dynasty has a mandate, an approval from the heavens that they should rule. Well, however, there's a superstition. What happens if an earthquake happens or some sort of plague happens? That shakes the support of the Chinese imperial rule. And in theory, the people could think that's a sign from their ancestors that they need to overthrow this dynasty and eventually replace that dynasty with a new dynasty. And that's part of that dynastic cycle. And the last religion I want to talk about today is Islam. Now, Islam was founded by Muhammad, and it is a monotheistic religion. Mono meaning believes in one God. Now, they weren't the first monotheistic religion. If you recall, this is actually this is way after Christianity and Judaism and even Zoroastrianism. However, I think Islam, in particular, these early empires that we'll talk about in our next slides, is very important. It gets spread primarily because it's on that intersection between like Trans-Saharan road trade, the Silk Road trade, and the Indian Ocean trade. So some of the beliefs for Islam, the 5 pillars are basically the 5 beliefs or 5 things that Muslims should do during their time, including, if they can, visiting Mecca and Medina. Their religious text is the Quran. It could be spelled with a Q or a K depending on your translation. And let's say the thing that we want you to mention on the AP exam, if the question relates itself to it, is Islam becomes very much a unifying force in the Middle East and the Arabian Peninsula. And Arabic is also the language is associated with Islam.